Chapter 13. Homily was ironing, bending and banging and pushing the hair back out of her eyes. All round the room, underclothes hung, airing on safety pins, which Homily used like coat hangers. "What happened?" asked Homily. "Did you fall over?" "Yes," said Arrietty, moving quietly into her place beside the fire. "How's the feeling coming?" "Oh, I don't know," said Arrietty. She clasped her knees and laid her chin on them. "Where's your knitting?" asked Homily. "I don't know what's come over you lately. Always idle. You don't feel seedy, do you?" "Oh," exclaimed Arrietty, "let me be." And Homily, for once, was silent. "It's the spring," she told herself. "Used to make me like that sometimes at her age." "I must see that boy," Arrietty was thinking, staring blindly into the fire. "I must hear what happened. I must hear if they're all right. I don't want us to die out. I don't want to be the last borrower. I don't want—" And here Arrietty dropped her face onto her knees. "To live forever and ever like this, in the dark, under the floor. No good getting supper," said Homily, breaking the silence. "Your father's gone borrowing. To her room. And you know what that means." Arrietty raised her head. "No," she said, hardly listening. "What does it mean?" "That he won't be back," said Homily sharply, "for a good hour and a half. He likes it up there, gossiping with her, and poking about on that dressing table. And it's safe enough once that boy's in bed. Not that there's anything we want special," she went on. "It's just these new shelves he's made. They look kind of bare, he says. And he might, he says, just pick up a little something." Arrietty suddenly was sitting bolt upright. A thought had struck her, leaving her breathless and a little shaky at the knees. A good hour and a half, her mother had said, and the gates would be open. "Where are you going?" asked Homily as Arrietty moved towards the door. "Just along to the storerooms," said Arrietty, shading with one hand her candle dip from the draught. "I won't be long." "Now don't you untidy anything," Homily called out after her, "and be careful of that light." As Arrietty went down the passage, she thought, "It is true, I am going to the storerooms to find another hat pin. And if I do find a hat pin and a piece of string, there won't be any name tape. I still won't be long, because I'll have to get back before Papa, and I'm doing it for their sakes," she told herself doggedly. "And one day they'll thank me." All the same, she felt a little guilty. Artful. That's what Mrs. Driver would say she was. There was a hat pin, one with a bar for a top, and she tied on a piece of string very firmly, twisting it back and forth like a figure of eight, and, as crowning inspiration, she sealed it with sealing wax. The gates were open, and she left the candle in the middle of the passage where it could come to no harm, just below the hole under the clock. The great hall, when she had climbed out into it, was dim with shadows. A single gas jet turned low made a pool of light beside the locked front door, and another faintly flickered on the landing halfway up the stairs. The ceiling sprang away into height and darkness, and all around was space. The night nursery, she knew, was at the end of the upstairs passage, and the boy would be in bed. Her mother had just said so. Arrietty had watched her father use his pin on the chair, and single stairs, in comparison, were easier. There was a kind of rhythm to it after a while. A throw, a pull, a scramble, and an upward swing. The stair rods glinted coldly, but the pile of the carpet seemed soft and warm and delicious to fall back on. On the half landing she paused to get her breath. She did not mind the semi-darkness. She lived in darkness. She was at home in it, and at a time like this it made her feel safe. On the upper landing she saw an open door and a great square of golden light which, like a barrier, lay across the passage. "I've got to pass through that," Arrietty told herself, trying to be brave. Inside the lighted room a voice was talking, droning on. "And this mare, the voice said, was a 5-year-old which really belonged to my brother in Ireland. Not my elder brother, but my younger brother, the one who owned Stalemate and Oh My Darling. He had entered her for several point-to-points. But when I say several, I mean 3, or at least 2. Have you ever seen an Irish point-to-point? No, said another voice, rather absent-mindedly. That's my father, Arrietty realised with a start. My father talking to Great-Aunt Sophie. Or rather, Great-Aunt Sophie talking to my father. She gripped her pin with its loops of string and ran into the light and threw it to the passage beyond. As she passed the open door, she had a glimpse of firelight and lamplight and gleaming furniture and dark red silk brocade. Beyond the square of light, the passage was dark again, and she could see at the far end a half-open door. That's the day nursery, she thought, and beyond that is the night nursery. There are certain differences, Aunt Sophie's voice went on, which would strike you at once. For instance, Arrietty liked the voice. It was comforting and steady, like the sound of the clock in the hall, and as she moved off the carpet onto the strip of polished floor beside the skirting board, she was interested to hear there were walls in Ireland instead of hedges. Here, by the skirting, she could run, and she loved running. Carpets were heavy-going, thick and clinging. They held you up. The boards were smooth and smelled of beeswax. She liked the smell. The schoolroom, when she reached it, was shrouded in dust sheets and full of junk. Here too a gas jet burned, turned low to a bluish flame. The floor was oilcloth, rather worn, and the rugs were shabby. Under the table was a great cavern of darkness. She moved into it, feeling about, and bumped into a dusty hassock higher than her head. Coming out again into the half-light, she looked up and saw the corner cupboard with the doll's tea service, the painting above the fireplace, and the plush curtain where her father had been seen. Chair legs were everywhere, and chair seats obscured her view. She found her way among them to the door of the night nursery, and there she saw, suddenly, on a shadowed plateau in the far corner, the boy in bed. She saw his great face turned towards her on the edge of the pillow. She saw the gaslight reflected in his open eyes. She saw his hand gripping the bedclothes, holding them tightly pressed against his mouth. She stopped moving and stood still. After a while, when she saw his fingers relax, she said softly, "Don't be frightened. It's me, Arrietty." He let the bedclothes slide away from his mouth and said, "Arrietty?" He seemed annoyed. "Etty," she repeated gently. "Did you take the letter?" He stared at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "Why did you come creeping into my room?" "I didn't come creeping, said Arrietty. "I even ran. Didn't you see?" He was silent, staring at her with his great wide-open eyes. "When I brought the book," he said at last, "you'd gone. I had to go. Tea was ready. My father fetched me." He understood this. "Oh," he said matter-of-factly, and did not reproach her. "Did you take the letter?" she asked again. "Yes," he said. "I had to go back twice. I shoved it down the badger's hole." Suddenly he threw back the bedclothes and stood up in bed, enormous in his pale flannel nightshirt. It was Arrietty's turn to be afraid. She half turned, her eyes on his face, and began backing slowly towards the door. But he did not look at her. He was feeling behind a picture on the wall. "Here it is," he said, sitting down again, and the bed creaked loudly. "But I don't want it back," exclaimed Arrietty, coming forward again. "You should have left it there. Why did you bring it back?" He turned it over in his fingers. "He's written on it," he said. Oh, please," cried Arrietty excitedly. "Show me." She ran right up to the bed and tugged at the trailing sheet. "Then they are alive. Did you see him?" "No," he said. "The letter was there, but just down the hole where I put it." He leaned towards her. But he's written on it, look. She made a quick dart and almost snatched the letter out of his great fingers, but was careful to keep out of range of his grasp. She ran with it to the door of the schoolroom, where the light, though dim, was a little brighter. It's very faint, she said, holding it close to her eyes. What's he written it with, I wonder? It's all in capitals. She turned suddenly. Are you sure you didn't write it? She asked. Of course not, he began. I write small. But she had seen by his face that he spoke the truth and began to spell out the letters. T-E-double-L, she said. Tell. Y-O-R-E. She looked up. Your? She said. Yes, said the boy. Your. Tell your A-N-T, aunt, said Arrietty. Aunt, my aunt. The boy was silent, waiting. Aunt L-U... Oh, Aunt Loopy, she exclaimed. He says, listen, this is what he says. Tell your Aunt Loopy to come home. There was silence. Then tell her, said the boy after a moment. But she isn't here, exclaimed Arrietty. She's never been here. I don't even remember what she looked like. Look, said the boy, staring through the door. Someone's coming. Arrietty whipped round. There was no time to hide. It was Pod, borrowing bag in one hand and pin in the other. She stood in the doorway of the schoolroom. Quite still he stood, outlined against the light in the passage, his little shadow falling dimly in front of him. He had seen her. I heard your voice, he said, and there was a dreadful quietness about the way he spoke, just as I was coming out of her room. Arrietty stared back at him, stuffing the letter up her jersey. Could he see beyond her into the shadowed room? Could he see the tousled shape in bed? Come on home, said Pod, and turned away.